Welcome back to the show, everybody. It has been a hot minute. Full disclosure, I've been burned out. I will be talking a little bit about that later. I apologize if you have been just waiting with bated breath for me to post a new episode. I seriously doubt that, though, because I only have a couple thousand subscribers, which I am very appreciative towards everybody who is subscribing. But yeah, I just had hit a point at the beginning of December where it was just really hard to motivate myself to post these. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of research. I don't have a production crew. I'm doing this all on my own. So I appreciate you bearing with me. But because we are in a bit of a lull this week, I'm sure a lot of people are not working or are working currently from their couch or their bed while watching Netflix, or like me, watching Heated Rivalry for the third time in a row. And so, maybe this will be a nice break in your day and you'll get to catch up on some hot topics and some predictions that I have for 2026. So I made the decision this year to stay in New York City for Christmas. I ended up cooking dinner for 8 of my friends. It was actually really nice. Holidays are always a logistical issue for my husband and I because our only options are Florida, Tennessee, where my family is from, or Vancouver and Taipei, where my husband's family is from. If we go to Florida, where my dad and brother are, we would have to usually stay at a hotel because my brother doesn't have space in his home and my dad lives in a retirement community with only one bedroom. My sister has a huge home in Tennessee, but it's an hour outside of Chattanooga in a town called Cleveland, Tennessee. Now, Cleveland isn't like a desolate area, but needless to say, there's not much to do there and not much to see. But I do understand why people love living there. It's very pretty. It's right near the mountains. If you love the outdoors, it's really pretty. And I love my sister. Like, I love her a lot. She actually got her woke awakening after the 2016 election, after being a Republican for all of her life. And it's funny because we often talk about how people should have not voted for Trump after, he said he likes to walk into women's dressing rooms at the Miss Universe pageant, after he said that he loves grabbing women by their pussy. And, that was enough for her. That was actually enough for her to be like, I cannot vote for this person. I actually remember how annoyed she was when she voted for Hillary. And since then, 9 years later, she has become a huge advocate for the LGBTQIA plus community, which is hard when you live an hour outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee. She is in a neighborhood full of people who are MAGA, who are, Bible thumping Trump voters. And she has gone to pride events in Cleveland, Tennessee. She's worn her Love is Love t-shirt. And that is a huge deal for someone who went to Liberty University and was raised as an evangelical Christian, just like I was as a kid. So shout out to my sister. She ended up hosting Christmas this year for my MAGA family. And I know how hard that was for her without me being there. And the funny thing is that I don't engage in politabrawls with my family, but we will get into discussions about topics like healthcare, tariffs, and other things that we can at least find mutual things to discuss or maybe even agree on. And it's funny because I've had some breakthroughs specifically with my father over the course of the past year since I started making political commentary. But I do think that asking my family to not vote Republican is pretty much like asking them to move to a different country at this point. It's just not going to happen. Big update for me. I am a giant hypocrite. A couple podcast episodes ago, I talked about how I was staying in New York City for New Year's because I was tired of falling into the gay optics trap of needing to go somewhere for New Year's Eve. Listen, guys, as I said again, this year has been a lot. I've grown from 80,000 followers to almost 1 million across platforms, and I'm still working a full-time career. I'm tired. It's why it's been a month since I've recorded a new podcast. And I just needed a break. And since the government is basically in recess right now and the pedophile in chief is only ranting on Truth Social every so often, I decided to take a break too. But back to me being a hypocrite, we are flying to Mexico this Thursday. I've already downloaded all of the Heated Rivalry books because I cannot wait until 2027 to know what happens. And I plan on just being in a horizontal position with a pina colada in my hand. So if you see me on Instagram stories the next few days, Yes, I misled you. So it is Tuesday, December 30th, and that means we have 1 day left in Trump's first year in his second term. We are at the beginning of 2026. We are at the beginning of season 2 of this series. And with that, we have to constantly remind ourselves that at his heart and soul, Trump is an entertainer. He has been in love with being on camera. He loves being the center of attention. He's an egomaniacal narcissist. Since Home Alone, since being on Sex and the City, since being on numerous TV shows and movies and The Apprentice, obviously, he loves being on TV. He loves being on screen. And this is something that has been following him for most of the latter stages of his life. And as much as I hate to admit this, he is really good at making a spectacle of things that gets his base really, really excited and engaged. But it also happens to usually make a big distraction in the media cycle. I have a feeling that when Trump started his second term, his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, probably told him, I think you should not do what you did in your first term and have half of your cabinet resign or fire them. And after Elon Musk and Trump had their weird divorce in the beginning of this year, I even think that he knew, what, I probably have to slow my roll a bit. Now, if America is a train wreck Jersey Shore reality competition show, which it kind of is, we're in season 2, or we're about to enter season 2. And what happens at the beginning of a new season in every single reality show? You get a new cast of characters because you have to keep it interesting. I predicted a few days ago on Threads that I think by April, we will probably see 3, maybe 4 significant changes in his cabinet. Obviously, Carolyn Levitt is leaving because she is pregnant. She will, resign. She will probably start posting awful, get ready with me, my life as a stay at home mom, blah, blah, blah. She's just on the pathway to being on Fox News and having her own show soon. I think that Kristi Noem is probably the most likely person to be ousted, just based off of the reports that Stephen Miller is furious with the lack of deportations that have been happening, which is weird considering that this administration also brags regularly about the fact that 0 immigrants are currently entering this country. I digress. I also don't think that Trump even thought that Pete Hegseth would get through congressional approvals in the first place. But I think he's on the chopping block because, frankly, he's been kind of boring in terms of drumming up a lot of media interest. And that doesn't create enough tension for Trump. I can also see Kash Patel as the final person who is ousted because, he is not really doing a great job, which is the understatement of the year. He's had a couple of huge blunders, specifically around him tweeting something and then it immediately being refuted as not truthful. And it's interesting because out of all of the circus acts that are currently in this cabinet, he's actually one of the few people that is actually qualified to do his job based off of his, past history and experience, along with maybe somebody like, Marco Rubio. So who would replace them? I don't know. But what I do know is Trump needs drama, and he needs it because he needs the distractions. I have been calling what Trump is doing with a lot of this drama that is created by his cabinet a distract and destroy strategy, but I've realized it's more of a distract and dismantle strategy. And he's been doing this for the past year. And he needs people in his cabinet to help him do that. We have Linda McMahon who can't pronounce FAFSA a couple days ago, or was that yesterday or something like that? And, it's funny just because she's also the one that kept saying A1 instead of AI. Trump needs that. He needs idiots to basically be idiots so that it just distracts from other things that are happening. And what I've noticed is that every time someone in his cabinet says or does something completely batshit crazy, it consumes the entire media cycle. And simultaneously, very quietly, like a thief in the night, Trump will do something behind the scenes that very few people pay attention to because they either don't understand the full ramifications of it, it's not enough news to get people excited on social media. All the mainstream media, cycles and the mainstream media outlets, they need clickbait headlines right now, and these aren't clickbait headlines. An example is when he passed the Genius Act in July. And during that time, we were in the midst of the big, beautiful bill being pushed through, the inhumane deportations, and dragging of people out of cars were being executed. And meanwhile, he deregulated crypto and introduced stablecoins as a de facto new currency. And his family profited billions off of it, not millions, billions. But because it couldn't make its way to the top of the news cycle, because his deals that pad his wallet are just status quo at this point, it's just not as interesting as US citizens being deported or families getting separated. So, yeah, I am anticipating that outside of a new press secretary, we will likely get at least 2 to 3 more resignations and a new cast of clowns in the cabinet, which will just make for new TV, new news cycles, and new horrors to just watch unfold. But pay attention to what is happening whenever his administration or somebody in his cabinet does something crazy, because a lot of the time, something that is very consequential is happening behind the scenes. So, for the past year, a lot of people have the words recession and depression and economy crashing top of mind. And frankly, I don't really see that happening, and most economists would agree with me, or maybe I agree with the economists because I'm not an economist. I'm just a commentator and analyst. The reality is that since the pandemic, we have been on the doorstep of a silent recession, and I think that we've been officially pushed into one now. Now, what is a silent recession, you might be asking? Well, an actual recession would be a significant drop in GDP. Typically, there would be a major financial reset. Unemployment would be skyrocketing. Inflation would also usually be falling rapidly, and interest rates would also be falling. I had thought earlier this year that we might be entering into stagflation, where we would have really high inflation and high unemployment and low economic growth. But this is actually the beauty of what Trump has created in this economy, because the S&P is at its strongest ever. Unemployment is fairly under control, inflation is stable, and interest rates are slowly creeping down. The only core negative indicators of the economy is that the dollar has been devalued significantly, and we will lose even more since the Fed just injected more currency into the economy. And job growth is pretty stagnant, low, and even negative in some instances. Now, the intentional crashing of the dollar was actually part of Trump's plan with Stephen Moran, who is the head of Trump's Economic Advisory Board. He wrote last year the Mar-a-Lago Accords, and in it, he said that the best way for the U.S. to increase the valuation of its exports was to devalue the US dollar. So think of it this way. If a distributor in France who purchases US products to sell in France, if they buy 30,000 pounds of oranges for 25,000 euros from Florida, last year around this time, they would be paying about $25,000 because the US dollar and the euro were almost even. But today, because the dollar is so weak, the importer in France is actually only paying around $21,000. So they're getting a big discount right now. Now, the other side of that is US sellers who are importing products from France are now paying significantly more. If a retailer imports 200 crates of wine from Bordeaux at a cost of 40,000 euros, they were paying around $40,000 a year ago to import that wine from France. Today, they're paying $47,000. Now, this doesn't include tariffs and import duties, but it's still a big switch. Most of the core indicators would, on paper, look like the economy is strong just based off of GDP, the stock market, and steady and stabilized inflation. There's also steady unemployment, and interest rates are slowly creeping down. Now, if you're MAGA, you're hearing this and you're thinking that every liberal complaining right now just can't read numbers and just isn't paying attention to all of the headlines and all of the reports about how strong the economy is. And Trump keeps saying we're in the golden age of America. We're actually kind of in the gilded age. And if you know what that means, it's not great. But the economic numbers don't forecast a recession or a depression. They basically say that we are in a silent economy, or a silent recession, I should say, which is earmarked by a K-shaped economy. The core values of a silent recession is affordability getting worse and wages not keeping up with inflation. If we wanted to keep up with the anticipated healthcare increases that are going to come after the ACA credits expire, the impact of tariffs on affordability and everyday goods, combined with the elimination of the de minimis exemption, housing costs have risen about 3.5% since the beginning of the year. New automobile New automobile costs have increased by about 3.5% at the beginning of the year. The devaluation of the US dollar, just to give a cost of living increase, your employer would need to distribute and give to you around a 11% raise just to keep up with the cost of living increases this year. Sorry to employers who are hearing this, but 4% as a cost of living increase is not remotely close to what it would need to be able to match up to what the affordability crisis is in this country. I've already talked a lot about how on Thanksgiving week with the Black Friday sales that everybody was bragging about, those were mostly driven in heavy volume by the sale of luxury goods and by people doing buy now, pay later. I've also mentioned in a few short videos on my social media channels that a huge contributor to the recent GDP reporting was rising healthcare costs, spending on defense, but most importantly to this conversation, spending on things like international flights and travel bookings through third-party US-based entities on international travel. And again, what kind of people travel internationally and spend a lot of money on it? Not the middle class and definitely not the working class. Right now, the economy is strong because the richest 10% that own 90% of the stock market is basically doing backflips every single day. This is literally trickle-down economics personified. Trump is hedging an already proven to fail economic approach that if rich people get more rich, it will eventually trickle down to the middle and working class. But this only works if these billionaires and corporations invest domestically in US-based entities that are not investing heavily in things like artificial intelligence. Almost all of the investments on whitehouse.gov that Trump is bragging about, they're also coming from foreign entities and they're foreign investments. And who do you think keeps these profits when it's foreign investments? The foreign investors. So before you say that we're headed to a recession, probably not. We might get a reset in February, March, April when companies start reporting Q4 results, and we might see the market dip maybe 8 to 10%, but we also might see strong Q4 results driven by luxury sales and, foreign investments and, more investment in AI. So you just have to remember that the S&P has gone up 17.4% since the start of this year. So when somebody says how strong the economy is because of how strong the stock market is, you need to ask them, has your personal income grown 17.4% this year? Or have you actually stayed stagnant? Or is it even harder for you to get by right now? If you appreciated this content, if you appreciated this video or this episode, please give me a rating and a positive review. Please comment if you're on YouTube. And as always, please subscribe to my channel. And I really appreciate the support as an independent creator.